Hello everyone, this is Deborah Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Today's podcast episode is brought to you by the Authentication, Validation, and Management Toolkit for those AP vendor maintenance teams that still have a mostly manual process and need fraud prevention at each critical step of the vendor maintenance process. Go to deborahrrichardson.com to see the authentication techniques, internal controls, best practices, and what template forms, vendor communications, and desktop procedures are included. Stay tuned. Today, we are going to look at 4 options to scrub the addresses in your vendor master file, and you know they need to be scrubbed. And at the end, I will include 2 bonuses that you can do with that extract file for addresses for internal and external fraud prevention. Welcome to episode 35, 4 options to scrub addresses in your vendor master file. In some ERPs like PeopleSoft or SAP, vendor addresses can be validated real-time, geocodes and tax code identifiers can be added to the vendor record. But if you don't use a system that has that capability, or even if you do, it doesn't standardize the address. This can result in a vendor master file where the addresses are based on whichever team member entered them in, such as P.O. Box with a period between the P and a period between the O and the space, or the P.O. Box with no periods at all. Or what about that non-standardized suite spelled out and even being on the second address line versus the STE, which is the USPS standard on the first line with the street address. So all types of errors in addresses can happen, and that can lead to a delayed receipt of check payments or the return checks, which can lead to uncashed checks and the task of unclaimed property, which we know you don't want. It can also lead to the return of those 1099, 1042 forms, which you definitely don't want. So guess what? It is time to scrub the addresses in the vendor master file. So scrubbing or cleansing the addresses in your vendor master file is best when done as part of a vendor master file data review. And if you see my e-guide or toolkit, I do have a complete 8-step process for that. But the first step in that process is to inactivate the vendors that have not done business with your company in 12, 15, 18, 24 months, whatever your business has determined is the right number of months. And once you do that, it decreases the number of active vendors that you even have to verify in the first place, or that you have to scrub those addresses for. So another part of that is also identifying duplicate vendors, which some of these options will help you with. So if you need assistance with that 8-step process or just some best practices in cleaning your vendor master file, you can see my e-guide or toolkit for the complete 8-step process, and I will put that in the show notes. So before I list and talk about the 4 options, I did want to mention that you will notice that I did not include the United States Postal Service or the Universal Postal Union, and the Universal Postal Union is for international, while the United States Postal Service is for U.S. So they've been left off the list, and they are free services. And that's because while USPS has an API and UPU has an EDI option, neither really have an option for a bulk upload or an API that can be used for a database address cleansing. The Universal Postal Union does include links to websites such as Uniserv that can standardize address formats and more based on country. Some are free, some are paid, but overall they're not options, or they don't offer options themselves on address cleansing, and they just don't have the tools for it. Unless if anyone's out there and if you have used the United States Postal Service or the Universal Postal Union to clean or scrub your addresses, please drop me a note or send me an email at deborah@deborah.richardson.com, and I will get that out and update it so that it can benefit other practitioners. Okay, so let's get into the 4 options. So the ones that I have listed, or I'm going to talk about, are ones that I have either used directly or indirectly, and indirectly meaning a client of mine used it. 2 of the options are provide validation for U.S. addresses only, and the other 2 provide validations for U.S. and international addresses. All have APIs, and yes, even tincheck.com, which is the first one, and all are paid services. So the first one is tincheck.com, and you guys, there are probably a lot of you out there that are already using it. And at what you can do is, at the time that you do the IRS TIN match, there is also the option that you can enter the address and it will check it against the USPS formats, and it will standardize and even add the +4 in the zip code. Now, what it does not do is it does not check to verify that the address that you've entered actually matches the vendor legal name that you've also entered on the form. So it doesn't do that. It just verifies it against the USPS formats, and it will tell you if it's a valid address or not. Now, one thing I would like to point out is, while there is a bulk option for TIN match and the other validations that TinCheck provides, there is no bulk option for verifying addresses. But I do want to point out that the same way that tincheck.com integrates with irs.gov for real-time validation of your vendor's legal name and tax ID, they do the same with USPS for the address validation and standardization. And lastly, for TinCheck, it is for U.S. addresses only. The second option is Melissa Data. Now, Melissa Data provides services such as address standardization, verification, and correction. Services also include change of address, email, and phone number verification, and they can parse your data to identify duplicates as well as verify that the address matches to the vendor. They validate both U.S. and international addresses, and the international countries, there are 240 plus that are included as part of their service. The third one is GX Systems, and you've heard me talk about them before or read it on my blog, because they are a reseller of Early Warning, which is a validation of bank account ownership, and I know I've talked about that before. For fraud prevention, because bank account ownership verifies legal name and bank account name match the bank account number. Now, what you may not know is they also validate that the addresses match to the vendor and that the addresses are valid. Now, it is subscription based, so it's a paid service, but both of those features are critical to today's validations. There is a bulk option available, but you only get that via a return of vendor data, so you have to give them a file and then they will give that back to you, including addresses, and you have to request it, but it is available. Now, GX Systems is restricted. just like TinCheck, to only U.S. addresses. But if you're using or think about using their services for bank account ownership, the fact that you can add address validation as well may be all that you need to get that business case or leadership approval for the tool. Okay, so number 4. Now, number 4 is Smarty Streets. And while it does not match the address to the vendor, but it will tell you whether an address is inactive, invalid, or vacant, which is more than what USPS provides. They have a single address verification tool, and they also have a bulk upload option. Both options will convert the address into USPS format, and they have both US and international. And again, international, just like Melissa data, includes 240 plus countries. So they have both US and international address plans. Now, I really like the resulting, the file that comes back once you upload it in Smarty Streets, because what it comes back with is it will have everything separated so that you can tell what you uploaded, and then it will actually insert into separate fields what the correct standardization for that address is. So those were the 4 options: TinCheck.com, Melissa Data, GX Systems, and Smarty Streets. So I hope you will check out at least one or more of those options. As promised at the beginning, I have 2 bonuses that will help you in your fraud prevention. The first bonus is for internal fraud prevention. Now, while you are cleansing those addresses as part of your regular vendor master file data review, use this time to also check against your company's HR file. This is an internal control that will compare the addresses, and if any employee addresses matches a vendor address, this can uncover internal or otherwise known as occupational fraud. Now, the second bonus is for external fraud prevention. As you're taking a look at those addresses, do you notice any P.O. Box only vendors? This could be a sign of a fraudulent vendor. You'll want to follow up with those vendors to obtain a physical address. If the vendor does not respond or refuses to provide a physical address, review their invoice and payment activity and verify whether your company was a victim of fraud. And then if you're not already doing it, allow the vendors to submit a P.O. box when you set them up. That's fine, but require that they also include a physical address. Okay, so we have the 4 options and we have the 2 bonuses. Now, once the address cleansing process is complete, if there are any issues with the addresses, such as it's not a valid address or it doesn't match the vendor, reach out to the vendor and resolve it before the next payment. If the vendor does not respond, place that vendor on payment hold until they do. Okay, so those are my tips. Does your department have any other tips to validate addresses? I would love to hear about them. Comment on the platform you choose to listen, or email me at Deborah, and that's spelled Debra. So it's Deborah at DeborahRRichardson.com. And if you're looking for an 8-step process to clean your vendor master file in your manual vendor setup and maintenance process, get the e-guide or the toolkit. And again, I will leave those in the show notes for you to click on. So thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 35th episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.